please welcome the ACLU's LGBT Project Director, James Esseks, and the Atlantic's Alex Wagner. Joining us remotely is Gloucester, Virginia High School student Gavin Grimm.
So we're going back to the mid-90s in terms of technology, and we have Gavin on a cell phone, on speakerphone, which I'm going to hold up to the microphone. Gavin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you guys hear him? This microphone is not, is this working? Okay.
So this is not the way it was supposed to be, but here we are.
Yeah, but here we are, and everyone's in the room, so that's all that matters. Gavin, I'm going to start with you because you're at the center of all of this. For people who don't know your story, you've become the public face of transgender bathroom rights and the struggle around that issue. I know that because the Supreme Court has issued a stay in the case, you are not allowed to use at school the bathroom of the gender that you identify with. Tell us, if you can, how that has made your life. What is a school day like for you at this point?
Well, in school I feel very vulnerable, for starters, because there's this very personal, very intimate aspect of my reality that has been put on public forum and discussed in a very public way, which itself was so inappropriate. And then you add in the dialogue of this rather conservative area, and further just consider the very act of using the restroom itself, and that I have to plan around restroom trips, and it's even sort of shameful almost to go and step into for example, the nurse's bathroom where I have been confined, and you have these thoughts in your head like, oh, it's kind of a walk of shame. They know why I'm in here. They know that I'm in here because I'm not fit to be with the rest of my peers, regardless of if or not they're actually thinking that hard about it.
Gavin, when you first... You were allowed to use, correct me if I'm wrong, you went to the school principal and got permission to use the bathroom of the gender that you identify with. And then the school board, several weeks later, decided to hold an open hearing about this. Is that right?
Correct. And
the school board apparently decided to hold an open hearing about this because parents in the school were upset. Is that correct?
I don't think there was ever the specification of parents. It was more broadly community members. That was the wording that I recall.
And talk to me a little bit about how the community has reacted in this moment and what it was like to be the subject of school board hearings.
I thought it was extremely disappointingly inappropriate for the school board to have facilitated a conversation about a minor's genitals in public forum, or anybody's for that matter. That was completely humiliating and not something any human being should ever have to experience, and really just a violation of common decency. And it was terrible to go through. I was 15 at the time. I was insecure. I was afraid. I was already enduring a level of scrutiny that was uncomfortable for me because my peers knew me before transition. And then they decide that my personal, I don't want to say issues because it's not an issue, but my personal situation should be something, a matter of public scrutiny, and it should not have been.
Did we lose you, Gavin?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. And it should not have been a matter of public scrutiny, and it was very difficult to sit there and listen to the community react by calling me a freak, by calling me young lady and miss and ma'am, all the while thinking they were doing so and proving some kind of point, or patting themselves on the back when they finished calling me a young lady as if they've stood up for something, which was interesting. And then more broadly after that, the community it's been icy, I suppose. The situation, it's just been that I have been sort of people are more hesitant to approach me. People who in the past have spoken to me no longer speak to me. I'll take a seat in class and people will move. It's even though I have no outright confrontations, it's been very implicitly very negative.
Gavin, I'm just going to put the phone down for 1 second and pivot over to James, because I know, James, you are with the ACLU. You've handled some very high-profile cases as it concerns LGBTQ rights. Why did you take this case on?
Well, we took on, so Gavin and his mother approached us with the problem that they were facing after he had, and he didn't make this totally clear, but I want people to know, Gavin at 15 stands up before a public hearing of the school board, and after listening to all these other community members complain about him, he gets up and gives quite a speech on his own, defending his individual dignity. And I can't imagine at 15 having the strength to do that. And so, kudos to Gavin. So somebody, exactly. So we get approached by Gavin and his family, clearly a very strong young man, who has a very important problem that is a problem that is shared by transgender young people all across the country. There are kids in schools in every nook and cranny of the country who are trans and who are having this same problem with the school district. I want to note that there are school districts around the country that have no problem with this, that are supporting their trans and gender nonconforming students very well with no problems. But then there are schools like the Gloucester County School District that are having troubles. So we looked at this and said, look, this is an opportunity to tackle a problem that's a real problem, that's at the core of the sort of the problems, the challenges that trans people, both young people and adults, are facing in the country as the country gradually starts to learn more about who trans people are.
I wonder how, and I'll get both of your thoughts on this, but I'll start with you, James, how you're feeling about your prospects, given the fact that the Supreme Court is taking this up. And I think if I asked you this question 2 weeks ago, your thinking about your prospects is probably different than where we are today, given the incoming 45th President Donald Trump and the comments he's made about the bench and who he intends on filling the bench with. We know we have one open spot. We could have more under President Trump, and I'm wondering how you think that might, where do you guys go from here?
Well, look, the court's taken the case. We obviously didn't want the court to take the case, but we think the position that we're taking and that Gavin's taking is totally right. It's the only correct interpretation of the federal ban on sex discrimination by schools, because it doesn't make any sense to force trans people into the wrong spaces. And how could that be anything other than sex discrimination? How can you understand the ban on sex discrimination and think about it in the context of trans people in single-sex spaces and say, okay, it's actually fine, it's not sex discrimination at all to force a trans man like Gavin into a women's room? That doesn't make any sense. In terms of the court, look, none of us knows how the decision's going to come out from the court until it comes out. Certainly we have to get through argument. But the prospect of President Trump appointing a new justice. Look, in perspective, this is a replacement for Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia was unlikely, although it was possible that he would vote for us, but probably unlikely that he would have voted for us. He did vote. I'll remind people, Justice Scalia voted for the good guys in the same-sex sexual harassment case in the late 90s on Cal, and gave a great decision, which is about interpreting sex discrimination laws. So actually, a Justice Scalia decision is a primary piece of our argument for Gavin. But that said, so that we're back to what could be a 5-4 court, but we don't know how it's not really possible to anticipate in advance how any of the justices is going to vote. We're going forward. We think we have great arguments, and there's a prospect for winning. Obviously, there's a prospect for losing, but this is a moment when I think, as you introduced Gavin, you said, Gavin, you've become the face of this issue for the country. A big part of doing civil rights litigation and a big part of a case in the Supreme Court is the reality that you've got a whole lot of people paying attention. You've got the country paying attention to this issue in a way that it hadn't before. And that is every bit as important to the advancement of transgender rights as all the lawyering that goes into the case. Because for any issue that we all care about, and there are many. A big challenge for all of us is to actually get people to pay attention to the issue that you want to change their minds on. And a case in the Supreme Court and a plaintiff who is as relatable as Gavin is gold, is an opportunity to have the conversation that we need to have with the country about the reality of trans people's lives.
Gavin, to that end, the importance of having a face on an issue, and to the degree that you've become the de facto face of this issue, how are you feeling in the current political climate, given some of the rhetoric that we've heard over the course of the last year, but especially since Election Day?
I think that my feelings towards the situation are that there really is no way of knowing exactly what's in store for us in the next 4 years. And some people are afraid and some people are nervous. But me personally, I'm just hoping for the sake of this nation and for the sake of this movement and the LGBT community, I'm hoping that it's a positive 4 years.
How have people in school been reacting?
I've been met with a sort of icy detachment. People who I spoke to previously no longer speak to me. People will move seats when I sit down. There's dirty looks. There's subtle confrontations. Like I stand up to move to the front of the room and someone bars me from moving forward. It's small and subtle things, but it creates an overall negative environment.
James, when we talk about the Supreme Court, there have been major advances made in terms of marriage equality, right? And we talk about that as a sort of seminal and important issue as it concerns the LGBTQ community. But when you talk about marriage versus the use of a bathroom, I mean, both are important, but one is something you do every day. You don't get married every day. And probably multiple times a day. And I guess I wonder if you think somehow in this conversation about the LGBTQ community, we've allowed the transgender community it's been forced to operate on a different set of basic rights.
Well, different set of basic rights, yes. But look, I think that, and this was touched on a little bit in one of the earlier panels, talking about this is just about bathroom access, restroom access, is a limited way to think about the issue. Because really, this is about so much more than access to the restroom, as important as that is. But because it's so important, because we're all human, we all have to use the restroom, this is just a fact of life, barring Gavin from using the men's room in his school, or if you take North Carolina, barring people, transgender people in North Carolina from using public restrooms all over the state, effectively bars people from participation in public life. Think about it in your own life. If you couldn't use the restroom when you're out in public, how do you go to school? How do you go to work? How do you go to the movies? How do you go to a restaurant, a sporting event, any event in your life? You either can't go because there's literally no place that you are allowed to go because Gavin can't go to the women's room, and if he's told he can't go to the men's room, and there's no single user facility, as there isn't in most places in our society, what are you supposed to do? So either you don't go, or you spend a lot of time and energy trying to map out how it is you can go to this place or that place. Is there a single user facility? And that is not the way the rest of us, cisgender people in our society, live. We don't think about this at all. It is the way transgender people live all the time, even outside of states like North Carolina, because people are worried about where is it safe for me to use single-sex facilities. And that is part of, when we say like, we want the country to start to understand better what the lives of transgender people are like, it's that. It's understanding that this isn't just about restroom use, it's about whether you can be participants in society or not.
Gavin, I know we've talked about some of the negative reactions that you've gotten since you've come out and become the face of this. What about your peers who have come out and felt freer or have been encouraged by your cause?
Well, I've had an outpouring of support online. I've had genuinely, and I mean this literally, hundreds of supportive messages through Facebook and other social media platforms. But in my own community, I do have transgender friends who have told me that my efforts in laying the groundwork with this situation have emboldened them to either seek more seek more protections from my school, or come out to their parents, or seek further transitional options. And that's a really, really powerful thing to hear. When you hear you're doing real-time, real-world good, it's something that is incredibly motivating.
How have your parents grappled with this? Can you just chart for us, their emotions as you've witnessed them throughout this process?
Sure, and really with both of them, there's been an incredible evolution in belief and in their support for me. I'd say only 3 or 4 years ago, I lived in a household where I was still told that homosexuality is a sin. And of course, I understand that being gay and being transgender are nothing alike, but that was their understanding of it at the time. And just this short time later, I have 2 parents who will stand beside me and stand with me in anything I do. And that was difficult for them at first, both because they were afraid of the backlash from their community and how it would reflect on them, and because it was new territory for them and they had to adjust very quickly in their beliefs. But they realized that it was for my health, and that holding me back and not allowing me to transition was causing immediate and dangerous harm to me every single moment. And so they got behind me, realizing that not doing so would be dangerous and detrimental to my health.
One of the things that's mentioned a lot when you talk about marriage equality, James, is that people who know other gay people were much more likely to accept the concept of. I'm sure that was my fault. I mean, I know it was. I would imagine, whether you think the same is true for the trans community, that in a way, having a child who's trans is almost an indoctrination into a new world, in a way that knowing an adult is trans is maybe not necessarily the same. That intimate relationship between parent and child, as Gavin describes, is a game changer.
Yeah, well, so look, we all, learn new things in the same way. We learn from our friends and from our families, from our co-workers. And so when there's a trans person in the family, all of a sudden you're up close and personal, and you learn a lot, and you go through the kind of journey and evolution that Gavin talked about with his family. And the challenge for us is to introduce more and more trans people to the whole country. And so Caitlyn Jenner is a great example of this. Caitlyn Jenner is not representative of trans people, broadly speaking, but most of America now knows a trans person, and that is unmitigated progress. And now, Gavin, and there are more and more and more trans people, and that is how America is learning.
We have time for a couple of questions, so if you want to raise your hand, there are microphones circulating. I'm going to follow a page from Ta-Nehisi Coates' playbook. Please make your question a question, and if you want to direct it to either Gavin or James, that would be great too. So just raise your hand over here, maybe.
Hi, Gavin. This is John. I am a graduate of Gloucester High School over 40 years ago, and I just want to say how proud I am. I know I'm supposed to be a question, but how proud I am of you. And the question is, even though you and I both grew up in Gloucester, is there any support system at all for you there in the community?
Gavin, did you hear that question?
I heard some of it. I heard the first bit, but then the actual question wasn't very clear.
The actual question is from a fellow Gloucester grad from a few decades back. Is there a support? Sorry, that wasn't meant as a dig. That wasn't meant as a dig. That was. I'm sorry, sir. That was not meant to be an insult. I'm an old person. I'm allowed to say that. To riotous laughs, Gavin, the question is there any support system for you in Gloucester at all?
So first, if I heard you right, and I hope so, or else this is going to sound egotistical, I think you said you were proud of me. So thank you.
Yes.
So thank you, first of all. And then second, I would say no, not really. There's nothing organized. The closest LGBT support group is in Richmond, and that is an hour drive on average for Gloucester, and then longer in some parts of Gloucester, shorter in others. But that's still a substantial distance away to travel for a support group. And that is really the only local resource. There is the GSA at the high school, which is it's fantastic that we have one, but it doesn't provide the kind of networking that people might desire, especially living in a community this small. So I guess no, I would say that I don't think there's much of a support system here outside of your individual friends and families who might be supportive.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and no one has ever seemed to have made the argument that barring trans people from the bathroom based upon presumed behavior, that they're some sort of like a predator or such. So being trans in the bathroom, that naturally means there's a risk to women, much like perhaps maybe a black young man wearing a hoodie as a gang member. You're presuming behavior, and it seems to me that would be the legal, no one has made that legal argument that that's unconstitutional.
James, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Well, actually, the safety argument sort of concerns that you're referencing is something that the state of North Carolina has offered as a justification for the HB2 restroom restriction law in North Carolina. And I think there is absolutely a legal argument along the lines of what you're alluding to, but also there's just a factual response, which is like, look, we know who commits sexual assaults. Sexual offenders commit sexual assaults, not trans people. And sexual assaults, by and large, happen by people that the victim knows. They, by and large, happen at home. And they exceedingly rarely happen in public restrooms. So this concern is all about hysteria, is all about fear-mongering, and is designed to fan people's sort of lack of familiarity with trans people and basic fear. And so it's despicable that North Carolina is pursuing that kind of line of argument. In court and with the public. But also, I think that once we sort of get to a place where the country can recognize and accept the common humanity of trans people, these kinds of scare tactics are just going to be recognizable to everybody as nonsense.
I just ask a follow-up question on that to Gavin. The idea, Gavin, when did you come out? 15 this all began?
Yes, but I came out at 14.
What did you think of people using the phrase sexual predator in conjunction with someone wanting to use the bathroom of the gender they identified with?
I thought it was absurd. I thought it was an argument that held no water. There's nothing inherently predatory or inappropriate about a transgender person. And it really did strike me as odd because what we know about sexual predators is that the last thing they care about is the law. And so they're not looking for and so they're not looking for some kind of hall pass. And there's also this misconception that there's this get-out-of-jail-free card if you commit a sexual assault in the bathroom and say, oh, I'm transgender. I don't understand. There's just no direction to tackle that in which it makes sense. It doesn't become clear no matter how I look at it.
That is the thing about sexual predators in the law, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I'm Jason. I'm with the Medill News Service. For James, the ACLU has been very forceful in criticism about Trump of late. I'm just curious, what sort of challenges do you think that his presidency could pose to LGBT and specifically trans people?
Well, look, we've made the LGBT community as a whole has made incredible progress under the Obama administration. Vinita Gupta was here just a while ago from the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department talking about all the wonderful work that they have done. And there's lots of executive agency actions that have come to pass through, and protections come to pass through the Obama administration. All of that is at risk under the Trump administration. And I'm not saying it's all going away, because it may not all go away. And we shouldn't just sort of accept that as a given, and we will fight it. But those are protections like the guidance from the Departments of Education and Justice to every school district in the country about having to respect the gender identity of students in all schools. Those are protections that the community worked for many, many years. and having them at risk is really distressing. So, and they also may get out of some of the litigation that they've been involved in, and they may not. But given some of the folks who have been suggested as heads of the Justice Department, it wouldn't surprise me. Look, we're gonna wait and see what they do, and see what it is that we can do to fight back to make sure that we can protect LGBT people in every way that we can.
James and Gavin, that is our time. Thank you, Gavin.